Hello, welcome to AQA GCSE Sociology, Model Answers and Exam Practice. We're going to focus today on Paper 1, Families and Education. I've taken some model answers with top grades from the AQA website with their mark schemes and justifications so you can see what you need to do in your exam. I just want to draw attention to the acronym CAGES, simply because if you're struggling for an answer in the exam or you're not sure what the question's asking you, think about the class, the age, the gender, the ethnicity and the sexuality of the people involved. Particularly the first four at GCSE, as this will probably help you have something to write about, and you can always use a combination of 2 or 3 of those factors to really draw an answer out. So if you get stuck, class, age, gender, ethnicity, sexuality could all be issues you might want to explore in any module. So just remember that. So the first question we're going to look at is a 3-mark question. Describe the double shift experienced by women in marriage. Essentially, you need to give a coherent description with few inaccuracies and demonstrate good knowledge and understanding of relevant sociological theories, concepts, evidence and methods. So what that really means is, for all of these 3-mark questions, you need to give a clear answer, not really anything that's inaccurate. You need to know either what the key term is, the theories that go with it, the ideas, the evidence that surrounds it. So that's quite an open exam descriptor there. So first off, the double shift is working women who continue to perform the bulk of domestic labour. They do the double shift, so paid employment and an unequal share of household work. So immediately that would link to feminism, would be my first thought. So we need to think about theories that would go with it, or feminism, evidence and methods perhaps here. So women employment who shoulder the main responsibility for domestic tasks, the expectation placed on women to take responsibility for cooking and cleaning, childcare, or the traditional role of women as carers. That's all fairly basic stuff which would get you easy marks. The student response got 3 marks, and as the feedback says, they don't start with a very good definition, kind of confusing the term breadwinner here, but it's got a really nice structure. They give a definition, they give an example, and then they explain it. And that fundamentally is how to get 3 marks: point, evidence, and explain. Therefore, when they talk about things like domestic chores, the traditional expectations, they're hitting the exam criteria, they're hitting the marking criteria, so the examiner is going to give them 3 marks. Remember, it's not a perfect answer, as it points to. There is room to make slight errors, and there is room to get things slightly confused at GCSE. That doesn't mean you should, but the examiner is trying to give you marks rather than take marks away from you, so remember that. One thing I would caution against though, a 3-mark answer should really be 3 sentences, not much more than that. And these are 3 fairly complex sentences. If you're writing a page, or half a page even, for 3 marks, you're wasting your own time. You're not going to get more than that anyway. So keep it a very simple: definition, example and explanation. Okay, so a question about patriarchy is really likely in the family section. Identify and describe one example of how patriarchy can affect the power relationships within families. That sounds like a really complex question, but actually the examiner's making it quite easy for you there. That addition of one example stops you just writing 3 different things, but it means you have to explain and evolve that answer a little bit more, which could be harder for some people. So again, it's exactly the same for 3 marks. A few inaccuracies allowed, good knowledge, understanding, sociological theories, concepts, evidence and methods. So you can bring in anything that will help you get the marks here. So you may be talking about things like male dominance, such as money management, influence over the roles performed, responsibilities for specific tasks like childcare, the traditional idea of the breadwinner, and stay-at-home housewife and carer. Those are all easy areas to go for in a question like this. Now this answer is really good for a number of reasons, but the main reason is its length. It's really short, really concise, but accurate. So they've accurately identified patriarchal power. They've put it in the role of the family, as the question asks you to do. So they've talked about traditional male and female roles here of authority figure and mother. and they've given an example. So the idea that the father is a disciplinarian, and this gives them the 3 marks. So this last part, as a consequence, the mother usually has less authority than the father. That word usually is really key. And again, usually in charge of disciplining the children. It's showing that this is the norm without going into lots of detail and lots of waffle. So it's a really well put together answer at GCSE level and worthy of the 3 marks. Identify and explain one advantage of using unstructured interviews to investigate relationships between family members. This is a really common feature of this specification, linking research methods within each module. So here you're looking at the method of unstructured interviews specifically, and you link that to relationships between family members. So you need to pick the right advantage and then develop that. So you can see all the AO1 content, the flexibility of unstructured interviews, the quality of the data, response rates, validity, things like that. And then you develop that further, as you can see with the AO2. Quality of data, flexibility, they all come back here, so you can read that for yourself. But essentially, you need to know your research methods to answer this question effectively. The feedback from AQA is a little short here, ironically, for a well-developed explanation of the relative method that clearly relates to the context of the question. Essentially, that is examiner speak for the student's got everything right. So they've started off with an advantage of unstructured interviews. They've rephrased the question, which is always really advisable. Then they've given an example on top of rephrasing it with the relevant advantage. They've shown why it's an advantage, and then they've talked about the method, again constantly linking it back to allowing individual family members, and then linking it back to what the interviewer and the researchers can do. So the structure there is brilliant. It's point, evidence, explain, and linking it back again, which is exactly what you need to be doing. This answer is equally a 4-mark answer, and it's really well put together. Look at how it starts off with the advantage. It links it to family members. It shows what doing this will mean for the type of data you get, in this case valid, and then it gives an example of the types of data that you might get and what that means for the research. This is probably about as concise as you can get for the 4 out of 4 in my opinion. It's really well put together, and again follows the structures really nicely. So you may want to pause and dissect both of these answers and look at what it is they've done to get 4 out of 4 if that's an area you're struggling with. This is our first education question. You'll see most of these questions are from the family part of the paper, just because we've already looked at sources elsewhere. So this one, identify and explain one disadvantage of using questionnaires to investigate the literacy skills of parents. No different to any other module, no different to the questions we've just looked at. Different type of method here, and again looking for disadvantage this time. So notice the level descriptor is basically word for word the same. The content just changes ever so slightly. It's very generic. It doesn't really talk about education much. Again, at the bottom, negative media coverage. Schools asking parents if they can read, that type of idea. Generally speaking, it's about the method. So this is why revising research methods is really key. The reason this says student response 3 is because student response 1 and 2 were not 4-mark answers, that's all. But again, notice this is a very short answer. One disadvantage of the questionnaires, very obvious, they might not be able to read a questionnaire. It's a written form of communication. So that is really what the examiner is asking you to tease out. And that's something that students have missed in mock exams and things like that. So just be wary of that. What actual format does the research method come in? The response rate from parents with poor literacy skills would be low, so the data would be unrepresentative is the word they use here. Data would be compromised in some way. So you wouldn't get the best results, essentially, is what you need to talk about. And that's the same for any question here. So as the exam board says, the student identifies a relevant disadvantage, and the explanation is the minimum requirement, the low response rate from parents, unrepresentative data. Those are the key terms. Again, 4 out of 4 for that is something that's very easily achievable. It's about being really clear and using structured answers really concisely. This question, we're going to be the one item we look at from item D. Identify and describe the research method used by Willis, including what you know of his perspective on education. So essentially you get a small extract talking about Willis's research. In this case, sometimes it might be from the actual research themselves in the exam. So you will have looked at Willis in lessons, obviously, and you'll know that you can pick stuff up from the actual exam paper here. So the 1970s, you may not have remembered that Willis was writing then, so it gives you context. It talks about working class, so remember cages from the start. Again, boys was what Willis looked at. So behaviour of these people, the lads in the ear holes are the language that was used then. So you can look at what happens here, and it gives you a lot of extra information. So during films in the hall, they tie the projector leads into impossible knots. Stuff like that isn't really relevant to the question. It's looking to throw you off with that, maybe, or it's just things that you could waste time copying that out into the exam paper. You don't need to do that. So you identify and describe the research method used by Willis, and what do you know? Well, Willis is a Marxist. It doesn't say that here, so that's one area where your revision will be checked, perhaps where your knowledge will be checked. So you can still get marks, everyone can access marks just by reading and comprehension, but just be aware you may need to know Willis was a Marxist, or be able to pick that out from the fact he looked at working class students. That's the big key here. Again, if he was looking at girls, you may fall into the trap of thinking he was a feminist, for example. So you can pick stuff out. You obviously I would always advise you to revise those different studies for questions like this. Particularly when it comes to essays, but this is a 4-mark question, so you'll need to balance up where your weaknesses are and what you need to focus on. For this question, the main thing to get you the easy marks is stating that Willis used observation. Again, you can talk about participant observation and non-participant observation. These are accepted alternatives. But the fact that he's observing students is really key here, because obviously he's an adult and he's an outsider, and the type of data this gathers is important. The fact that he's writing from a Marxist perspective is something which isn't given in the source, and again you're going to have to work from your own knowledge on and maybe look at the clues. So he took part in activities in school, but he also stood aside from them, so it was both participant and non-participant, that he's trying to understand why the boys don't conform and what they actually do at school. And then he's comparing them to other groups. So there's lots of mixed methodology to Willis if you look at it from an A-level or degree level stance, but you don't need to know all of that, and you don't need to put it into the GCSE. So don't waste time doing so, and don't confuse yourself. This student response, a clear 4 marks, really well structured, really well put together. Starts off, states what the method is in full, shows exactly what Willis could gain from using that method when he talks about first-hand, badly behaved group and non-conformist working class boys. So throws all the key words there, really showing off that knowledge. Willis then wrote about education from a Marxist perspective. That last sentence is the one which puts the key marks in there. I would say there's a mixture here, because the student has clearly revised really hard and has clearly shown that they know exactly all the right buzzwords to hit, as it were. The development for me is fine for GCSE, absolutely fine. It's not the most important part though. It's showing that you know all the aspects of the research method and that Willis was a Marxist. That's what gets you the top marks. So notice there's a very clear lack of waffle and a very clear focus on 1, 2, 3, 4 marks and then moving on in the exam. So what's called an appropriately developed description, an awareness of where it took place, and that Willis wrote about education from a Marxist perspective. So this is stuff that you can gain from the source as well as your own knowledge. You should be aware of essay questions having this structure of discuss how far sociologists agree across the whole exam paper, across every module. So in this case, it's that feminism has changed marriage in modern British society. It's a really interesting question, this. It's a rare question where feminism is a focus, and that gives you some easy marks, really, if you know about feminism, and linking it to marriage and changes in modern British society. So looking at changes over time, and how does that link to feminism? For 10 to 12 marks, to be a level 4, is detailed knowledge and understanding, again, of relevant theories, concepts, evidence and methods. So anything on the spec, anything that's in the module that's relevant to this question, and is explained in detail and linked really well. Sustained application of relevant theories, so bringing it back again and again to why something is relevant, which concept, which evidence, which method perhaps, and not having too many inaccuracies. So notice that it doesn't have to be perfect. Too many students get hung up on writing the perfect essay. When you've got 12 to 15 minutes in a GCSE exam, perfection is just not something that you should be striving for. Close to. Be realistic though. So critical analysis, evaluation of relevant theories, showing both sides, supporting judgments and evidence. That's going to get you 10 to 12 marks. So let's look at what this student wrote and why. Firstly, notice the essay response is broken into sections. Paragraphs are really important. The intro is really short and concise. Some sociologists would agree. Other sociologists would say there's been a limited influence of feminism, or that it's had a negative impact. So essentially, starting off with, there's two sides. Feminists is where you would start with the essay, and interestingly, this opening paragraph blends that with functionalism. So it's like a sandwich here of feminist, functionalists, and then comparing with Oakley and Wilmot and Young. So two different sociologists. Straight away, that establishes a really high level of understanding, and that shows the examiner, if they were to run out of time, there's still a lot of really good marks there. Good use of keywords like symmetrical family, not a lot of waffle. Go straight into what Oakley found next. Talks about male and female roles here, relating it to housework and how that links to marriage. So it develops really nicely, and again, keywords like the double shift and explanations really stand out here. So you can see why this would be a top level answer. Even at this point, when the essay isn't finished, there's a lot of marks here. Let's look at the next part. The essay then builds on this theoretical perspective of new right sociologists being critical to feminist approach to marriage, and explaining that. And obviously the new right are as polar opposite to feminists as you can get in many ways. So that's a really good move, if you like, from a tactical point of view. So you've got this kind of sandwich of feminist, functionalist, then adding in a third perspective, which is really the antithesis of feminism. It's a really, really smart essay writing technique. And then to get those 12 marks at a conclusion that's really solid. So feminism has had some impact, the reality being there's still traditional roles, housewives and mothers, showing a limited impact. That's really, really key. It weighs up both sides, and it shows that for some people it's huge, for others it's not. And if you go back to the idea of cages, there's essentially a lot more you could pick out of that if you had the scope of A level or beyond. So AQA have said this student clearly responds to the question, detailed answer, and again this idea of sustained application of relevant theories. They go from one theory to another again and again. They develop it, they show both sides, they evaluate it, and they have a conclusion. That's really important. That's why it's a clear 12 marks. To conclude then, if you've just read that example essay and you thought, I just can't write that, here's the indicative content for AO1 and AO2. What that really means to you guys is the basics and the mid-range material that can get you between 0 to 6 marks. So obviously you need to talk about feminism. You may want to talk about Marxism. You may want to talk about the importance of marriage. Then you can talk about social attitudes, the changes to the roles of the family forms, legal status of women, social attitudes, all of that type of stuff is very basic things. And if you build on that with feminist theories, with Marxist theories, if you build on that with functionalist theories and new right theories as the sample answer did, you can see there's so much range that actually getting high marks is possible. So you might want to talk about divorce, employment, and how that's changed for women and changed for men, change of norms and values, all of those things. You can bring out lots and lots of ideas. Obviously, what may stop you is not knowing particular theorists such as Oakley or Young and Wilmot. You will have studied them, but if you can't recall them in the exam, all's not lost. You should never ever leave an essay blank, especially if you've got time. Even just writing as much sociology down as you can rather than sociologists will get you marks, and that will get you grades. So hopefully you can read over this list, you can go back through and you can see just how important it is and how easy it is to get marks through a little bit of logic. I hope this video has been useful. If you have any questions for me, again, leave them on the classroom, leave them on the comments below, email me, and good luck for the exams.